And guten Tag, Deutsch with Dennis here. Dennis Rodenberg, glad to be here with you here today. One of my two lessons I'm planning on making for this trip I'm leaving in July. So if you happen to be on the trip or enjoying this, can't wait. Otherwise, maybe this might bring a little bit more of joy if you're learning some German. So, anyways, thought I would get started. And mainly, again, this video for those people on the trip that I am leading in July of 2025. But I'm not expecting y'all to learn German and like be able to have conversations. But one of the reasons I wanted to do this was I just want to take a brief moment, go through some of those similarities and differences of the language. This simple, hopefully simple approach will allow you to understand things. Not maybe not understand, but at least have an inkling of what they might generally mean, whether you hear them when someone speaks them, or if you see them on a sign or reading a pamphlet or anything like that around tourist sites that may not have that English translation readily available. But, English, as we look just at the language aspect here, it's primarily a Germanic language, which means most of our sounds and a lot of our words come from German. So, going to be very similar. We're spending our time on this trip in an area called Sachsen, and that is where we get the term Anglo Saxon. So you can kind of see where that language fits in together. And this little guide will go over some common words you might be saying or hearing. Now let's start with the alphabet, and you can even kind of sing the ABC song to it. And that's what I'm going to try to do. Okay, los geht's, which means here we go. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z, yada, 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 something else. But you kind of get the idea there. And so if you go through those letters, you'll see them on the screen up here where I was able to put those. Those are the 26 letters that we have in our English and what they would translate to in German. Then there's some extra letters, which you may see, and you get a little bit added in there. Maybe if you happen to be a metal fan and umlauts and stuff like that. Otherwise, you have the S set. So you have S set, umlaut A, umlaut O, umlaut U. So those are where we get all these letters from. So as we go through pronunciation, as you may have heard through that alphabet song, some of them sound pretty similar, but I'm going to go through ones that sound maybe just a little bit different. So first, the vowels. As we speak them, this is the sound we use in German. A, A, E, O, U. So you hear the specifics of the first three, A, E, which sounds a little bit different than English. So first we'll look at ah. This can be like a kind of like a soft A, like ah. A word that you might hear when we're in Germany is Abend, which means evening. It's not Abend, it is Abend. And so that would be when someone were to greet you or something like that. Sometimes you might hear Guten Abend, but that would mean evening. Now, the longer A that we mentioned in English is actually the German E or A. Auf Deutsch, A. Think of maybe the Austrian flower Edelweiss. That is spelled with an E at the front. It's not Edelweiss, it's Edelweiss. Edel's also a donkey, so now you know an animal and you can yell at things calling them an Edel. Why not? And then another word you'll see around a lot, especially when you're talking about elevators or steps, is a gay, which means Erdgeschoss or earth level. Think of that as floor zero. And we'll get into that a little bit more when we talk about some of those cultures and some of those things there. And then you have the English E in German becomes the E or I. So when we think of that long E, that is actually the E sound is an I in German. So, for instance, you have the any place, any time. That's irgendwo or irgendwann. Any is Irgend, Irgend. So you see that here. And then when we are doing our travel, and the capital of Germany is that we know in English as Berlin is actually pronounced auf Deutsch Berlin. You see that little I on there, and some of this I's do get a little bit confusing because you actually have some stuff when you have like a double letter, like Innenstadt is pronounced more as what we would look at and see in English as in. But most of it is going to be E, and that will be that emphasis on the E. Now, then you also, when you're talking about vowels, you get combination letters. Try not to get too tricky. And these are very similar to English, but the rules are pretty standard. So if you have EI, English EI come together, that's when the English comes in handy. So this is actually where you would say the English pronunciation of that second letter. So, instance, if you want ice cream, that is pronounced ice, ice, or it's gelato. But ice cream is EIS. So you have ice. That EI becomes an I. And then you'll be hearing a lot, especially when you're traveling in Germany, because what do we think of a lot with Germans? World War II. The name in German for war is Krieg, and that's with that E after the I. So Krieg, der Krieg, is pronounced again with that second English letter, that I and E kind of smushed together. Last two vowels have a longer sound. So instead of hearing an O as an ah, it will almost always be a long O. So even though a boat is pronounced the same, das Boot and the boat, it has two O's in German. So it is boat, not boot. I know you may want to think about that nice 1 liter or 5 liter boot that you're going to be drinking, but that is not quite the same. That's actually Stiefel. And then another instance with the U is oo. So it's not bus as what we would know. It's boos. Ooh, oos. And then a castle is a burg, not a berg. Even though we'll be going to the Wartburg, we would say it in English Wartburg, but it's a very kind of a long U sound on there. Now, moving away from our consonants, our vowels into our consonants, here's where we have some of those differences that we have. So, for instance, C, that is always a soft C, and the K will be that hard K. So, temperature, which we will all have in Europe, just like anywhere else, it's Celsius. Celsius, but Celsius. So you just kind of pronounce it with that German oo, but it's s. There's no C on that. But a cat is a Katze. Again, very similar, just put that different letter on the front of that word. Cat, Katze. Cat, Katze. And then when you have another combination with the C, then these are the ones where you're going to see a little bit more difference. And these are the combination CH and SCH. Now that CH kind of has that what we'd say a guttural sound, kind of in the back of your throat. And so the Wartburg is located in Eisenach. Ah, ah. You kind of have that there. It's nice. It's not Eisenach, because that's how we would probably see it when we look at it in English, but it's Eisenach. Uh, and it's I, you would say ich, not each, ich, eek. It's ich. And then we're going to spend a lot of time as well, like you do anytime in Germany, in a church. And this is Kirche. And that's a little bit tough to pronounce, but you will hear it Kirche. So it's Kirche. So that kind of is in there in the middle. The SCH is more of that sh sound. So even though you have that CH, it's a sh. So cherry is Kirsch. Kirsch is a cherry. And while it would be funny, I don't think you run into much of a Kirche or a cherry church. Now, moving on to another consonant, we have the G. That's always going to generally be, unless you're having an English word that may move over, is going to be a hard G. You'll hear a lot of words for where Germans might say genau. That's Genau, which means A-OK. Green is grün. So you have that U, or you have that hard G at the front. And energy, while it's spelled very similar, is pronounced energie. Energie. So you have that extra hard G on that. And from what you may know, the J, like ya, is a Y sound. It's not ja or anything like that. It's ya. So that's a Y. And so that's the main one you think of. Now, one that you may hear a little bit different, or you can kind of think of, and for me being a proud VW owner, I think of the V and the W. They're a little bit different on this. When I put that V and W together, what do you think of? Volkswagen, or a car or a bus, those old classic Beatles there. And so again, it's Volkswagen in German. We would say Volkswagen, but that is what the actual pronunciations of the V and the W are. So you can always kind of go and say Volkswagen. That V is a hard F, f, and then the W is that V that we would normally say, double V, if you look at it how it's spelled. So again, Wagen instead of wagon. So you have that V that comes, that kind of that V sound for a W. Drinks also is a hint. When you will order wine, if you're a wine drinker, they will probably say, hey, would you like a Viertel? A Viertel is 1/4 of a liter. And so you hear again that V is more of an F. So it's a Viertel, a hard attack on that V. You'll get a small carafe to fill then with your glass. And one thing you might know if you're talking English with someone who speaks German or another European language, they sometimes will actually switch that V and the W. So, again, thinking of drinks, you would have vodka, not vodka, vodka. Some people will say vodka, but you will sometimes hear that W in place of the V. It's just one of those weird correlations that we might have. And finally, we have at the end of the alphabet is a Z or Z, but it's Z when we have that. You will hear a lot of Z's, a ton of Z's actually there. And this is a hard attack on the Z. It's not that soft, but my first German professor, Herr Nabrotsky, always made us say a very hard pizza, pizza. And you have that S on that. So it's a TZ or TS. That is the Z in German. Set. Set. So it was always a hard attack. So you'll see pizza, also bezahlen, zahlen. So that Z actually is more of a TZ or TS, and bezahlen means to pay. Now, in fact, the Z is so common in German that on German keyboards, the Z and the Y are switched. So when you're writing back home, and if you happen to have a German keyboard in front of you, watch out for that love zoo, because the Z and the Y again are switched. So the Y, that is always just one of those funny things that we have here. Take your time. I know it may seem like a lot, but once you hear it or you take a little bit of time, go back, you can slow things down and maybe practice a little bit of these consonants as well as your vowels. Now to these extra letters that especially you'll see on signs, you may not exactly know what it is. And these are kind of correlated. If you were to come into the country, for instance, from Germany, you either would have an extra letter. You basically would put an extra letter in place of that umlaut, which is mainly an E. And then the first one that we come into is the famous S set. Looks like a B, doesn't it? Except there's this little bit of line in front of it. It's really not too common. These are usually used for two S's. And so anytime you're around a German city, you are going to see the S set. Anytime a street is mentioned, Strasse. It's just kind of that extra S, Strasse. This is kind of from the old school German in the 19th century. That they had many very similar script to this, but the S set kind of stayed the same. So you'll see a lot of this funky looking B, which means Strasse, that two S's. Now, umlauts again over those three vowels, A, O, and U, may give you a little bit of pause. Linguists, people that study this for a full living would say the best way to say is just to say the normal vowel. So, for instance, ooh. So if you have an umlaut U, you say ooh and then round your mouth. Ooh, ooh, kind of a round there. But you can kind of think of just in soft E or something like that, or especially the O and the U, it can kind of be like So for the a, or and ooh. So you feel a little bit different. E. Very funny. You can be able to work through this a little bit more. And if Germans hear you trying to pronounce an umlaut, most likely they're going to give you quite a bit of a break if you don't get the sound quite right. But if you want to know what these words are, so one of my favorite dishes to prepare is Spätzle. Spätzle with that umlaut A. So you kind of hear it's not Spätzle, it's Spätzle. Spätzle, along with that long A. And what we will often, for umlaut O, we'll see a lot of going back to a Lutheran reformer of the Second World War, Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Hoeffer. So you have that would be that technical pronunciation of Hoeffer. That is very strange, and we just say usually most times Bonhoeffer, spelled O-E. And so we just kind of say Hoffer. That usually is how we do it in English, but that would be the technical pronunciation if you hear German talk about Dietrich Bonhoeffer because of that, again, umlaut O. Now, and when you go to the U, we have a very common name, and it's actually the most common German name, and that's Mueller. That comes from an umlaut U. So in German, you wouldn't say Mueller or even Miller, you would say Müller, Müller. And that means a miller, someone who milled grains. That's the most common last name. You'll see that much. And then we have two umlaut U's for where we will be arriving, plus a few more. So we'll be flying into Munich. And in German, that's pronounced München. And there you get actually both. You get two things there. You get the umlaut U and you get that CH. So München would be how Germans would pronounce Munich. And then spelled almost completely different, at least at the beginning, we will be spending our first night in Nuremberg. Nuremberg. Not Nuremberg, but Nuremberg. That would be how you would pronounce Nuremberg in German. So those are those two German names. I've given you a lot of information. I hope that this might be a little bit helpful. So when you're hearing me speak or you hear things, you can kind of get your ear into it a little bit more. Go ahead and leave me some comments if you have questions. Mainly, again, this is around the language. I'm going to be posting another video about some of those traditions, cultures, so on and so forth. So I hope you've enjoyed Deutsch with Dennis as we enjoy looking forward and really the countdown for this trip coming up in July. So, as we like to be able to say, Ruhe sei euch, peace be with you. And I'm just exceedingly thrilled continually to be able to spend some great time in Germany with you all later. Tschüss.